As they are leaving, a joke in poor taste. A Russian, a Pole, an American, and an Israeli are being interviewed. The interviewer asks each in turn, "Excuse me, what is your opinion on the current meat shortage?" The Russian replies, "What's an opinion?" The Pole replies, "What's meat?" The American replies, "What's a shortage?" And the Israeli replies, "What's excuse me?" To all our Israelis in the Kahal, my apologies. And Russians and Poles and Americans, actually everyone. Two old Jews were sitting on a park bench, friends for many years. One looks at the other and says, "Oi." The other looks back and says, "Oi." The other replies, "Oi." And the other replies, "Oi." They repeat this exchange a few more times. And then Max says to Irving, "I thought we weren't going to talk about Israel." Friends, we do need to talk about Israel. The last time Mount Zion had a year focused on Israel was in 2010, which was the last time I gave a high holiday sermon about Israel. A lot has changed in these past 8 years. Israel has become both more beloved in some circles and countries and more reviled in many others. If we talk about Israel honestly and fully, we may be able to remember why we love the land or people of Israel and what we fear most about what is happening in Israel or to Israel and how it impacts our lives. If we talk about Israel more honestly and fully, we might feel responsible as part of our small Jewish family to defend Israel and to support the Jewish values that are important to us, from justice on the one hand to self-preservation on the other, and how compromise may even bring us to peace. It has not always been so difficult to do this, to talk about Israel. Some of us can remember what it felt like 25 years ago when speaking about peace was not naive, but a real possibility. In 1993, I was teaching fifth graders in Larchmont, New York. It was my first time teaching religious school. I remember a particular Monday. As usual, I left my rabbinical school class 15 minutes early in Lower Manhattan so I could race to the subway to get to Grand Central, then a Metro North train to Larchmont, and then a cab to the synagogue, where I'd arrived to a class full of 10-year-olds waiting for me. But none of that chaotic schedule mattered. I was on cloud 9. I told those students with no hyperbole, "You are going to remember this day for the rest of your lives." That morning I told them, President Clinton stood on the lawn of the White House with Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat, and ushered in a new era of peace. This was just 4 years after the Berlin Wall came down. There were hints that Northern Ireland's intractable religious war could be resolved, and now peace in the Middle East. That September 13th morning, a reluctant Prime Minister Rabin said these words, "Let me say to you, the Palestinians, we are destined to live together on the same soil in the same land. We, the soldiers who have returned from battle attainted with blood, we who have seen our relatives and friends killed before our eyes, we who have attended their funerals and cannot look into the eyes of their parents, and we who have come from a land where parents bury their children, and we who have fought against you, the Palestinians, we say to you today in a loud and clear voice, enough, enough of blood and tears. We have no desire for revenge. We harbor no hatred towards you. We, like you, are people who want to build a home, to plant a tree, to love, to live side by side with you in dignity, in empathy, as human beings, as free men. We are today giving peace a chance, and we are saying again to you, enough. Let us pray that a day will come when all will be able to say farewell to arms. That was a quarter century ago. I remember the feeling like yesterday. A real vision of peace in our lifetime. When people talked about Israel and the world, there was admiration. There was a sense that the old was becoming new. Judaism's gifts to Western civilization were honored. Biblical visions of peace were relevant and possible. Let them beat their swords into plowshares. Since then, a generation has been born who never experienced this hope, seen justice and peace honored in the realpolitik of the Middle East, where the value of self-preservation usually reigns. Those Larchmont fifth graders are now 35 years old. I wonder where they are now, how they remember that fateful day, and how they talk about Israel today. I love Israel, but I hate what is happening in Israel today. The government has made decisions that violate my values and make my blood boil, and I have no qualms about criticizing them. At the same time, I hate what is happening to Israel. I will defend Israel as people unfairly demonize, delegitimize, and hold Israel to a different standard. I worry that too many American Jews feel alienated from Israel. It might be because of injustices that Palestinians endure every day, and that focus is all that they see. Or because of the way that liberal Judaism is not given equal status and funding or legitimacy in the government. Or because Israel simply doesn't play a role in their Jewish identity. Being Jewish means having some relationship with Israel. It might be an estranged relationship. It might be currently unknown, like discovering a relative late in life. It might be a robust connection, a tenuous one, or it might be confusing. Whether we choose it or not, Israel is a part of us. Our namesake Jacob becomes Yisrael after some wrestling. We too have the same fortune or misfortune. What would the world look like without Israel, without a Jewish state? What would happen to Herzl's Zionist vision of a refuge for Jews no matter what happens, whether in Russia, Yemen, or England? What would happen to Echad Ha'am's Zionist vision of a cultural center for Jewish life, with Israel being the center of a wheel with spokes reaching outward throughout the world? Take Hebrew, for instance. In Israel, as Anat Hoffman, the head of the Israel Religious Action Center, noted, we resurrected Hebrew. It was the second most famous resurrection in our region in history. What may be surprising is how positively Israel is viewed among Americans. Fully 74% of American adults have a favorable view of Israel, which is the best showing in 27 years. This was from a Gallup poll this past March. The only issue is that the support is becoming more partisan. Support for Israel is 83% among Republicans, 64% among Democrats. And there is also a generational divide. For adults 55 and older, support for Israel was at 80%, while support for the Palestinian Authority at 18%. For millennials, support for Israel is at 65%, while support for the PA jumps to 31%. This shift is connected to another fact. Young Jews are increasingly saying that they have no religion at all, despite identifying themselves as Jews, often proudly. This is all from a Pew Research Center's Portrait of Jewish American Life from 5 years ago. It reported that these Jews of no religion are rewriting the norms of Jewish behavior. They are far less likely to raise their children Jewish, to give to Jewish charities, to belong to Jewish organizations, to feel connected to the community, or to care about Israel. If many young Jews are feeling distanced from their religion, and millennials in general are feeling more sympathy toward Palestinians, and to be clear, we ought to feel sympathy, then we have a tough road ahead when it comes to talking about Israel. There is no shortcut. It will take time and effort. And so today on this Rosh Hashanah, I ask you to invest the energy to learn, to listen, to talk about Israel, allowing for complex truths. As we talk, I hope that it is in part from our love for Israel, first of all, and then from our legitimate fears for the enemies that Israel faces, for how Israel is affecting anti-Semitism, and for what Israel is becoming. And finally, from our responsibility to our worldwide family, the Jewish people. We first talk about Israel from our love, Ahavat Yisrael. My own relationship to Israel was born from weeks of physically connecting to the land and its past. When I was taking a college class on the Bible, the professor, an archaeologist, showed slides of the land from the desert to the Dead Sea, and I fell in love. That summer, I was 18 years old, traveling with 20 other university students for 6 weeks in Jerusalem, studying sacred space from the perspective of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And then we spent a month at Sipori, an archaeological dig in the north. There, in the heat and in the dirt, in an Iron Age pit 20 feet down, I felt connected to land, to history, and to my Judaism in a way that made the next years of transitioning from pre-med to rabbinical school possible. Amos Oz writes, "The land of Israel is not a museum of God. No place is a museum of God. No person and no inanimate object is a thing of worship. You come to a place, a hill, the desert, a spring, a house. You change it and you make your mark upon it. But it is also important to be open and give it the opportunity to leave its mark on you." The land left its mark on me. My Ahavat Yisrael, my love of Israel, was born that summer, and it grew through many experiences, especially during my sabbatical in 2008, when I discovered my great-grandmother's grave on the Mount of Olives. But my awe of Israel came from a high school class at my synagogue. Imagine, my teacher said, standing in Rome under the Arch of Titus, this 2,000-year-old structure that celebrates the destruction of Jerusalem and the conquest of Judea, our ancestors. And then imagine standing on the rampart walls of Jerusalem, gazing upon a vibrant, diverse society that our people have recreated with all its imperfections. How can you not feel the power of the improbability of that moment? In Psalm 126, which we sing before the blessing of the meal on Shabbat, we say in astonishment, "We were like dreamers as we returned from exile." Yossi Klein Halevi writes about this return in his new book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, which is our community book read this fall. Focusing on the end of the Six-Day War, when Israel attains the old city of Jerusalem, he says, that iconic image of the paratroopers, arms around each other's shoulders, standing at the Western Wall and gazing upward. Though they just won the greatest military victory in Jewish history, their young faces revealed not triumph, but awe. Like pilgrims at the end of a journey, at that moment they weren't representing the might of the sovereign state, but the hopes of an ancient people. Even though my own sense of being Jewish, does not feel that I am in exile, I am perfectly at home in my Judaism in the United States, I can still feel joy in that return. For 2,000 years, through unspeakable horrors, we have kept the vision of the land of Israel in our daily prayers and rituals. Does that make me a Zionist? Halevi suggests the answer depends on what one means by Zionism. If it refers to the political movement that emerged in the late 19th century, then certainly there are forms of Judaism that are independent of Zionism. But if by Zionism one means the Jewish attachment to the land of Israel and the dream of renewing Jewish sovereignty in our place of origin, then there is no Judaism without Zionism. Halevi's Zionism is my Zionism, even as I worship at Mount Zion, here in St. Paul. Israel's existence is part of my Judaism. We also talk about Israel from our fears. According to Ben-Gurion, if you want to be a realist, you must believe in miracles. And sometimes that can be pretty hard to do. There are two fears that seem quite legitimate. One is the fear of Israel's existential threat because of Iran's proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, stockpiling weapons and desiring to wipe out Israel in a heartbeat, if given a chance. The other fear is what the world thinks of Israel and how that impacts Jewish communities on college campuses and even in entire countries. In England, a recent poll said that 40% of Jews in England would seriously consider leaving the country if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister. Corbyn is head of England's Labour Party, which leads the opposition. His cozying up to leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah, his stances on anti-Semitism that allow for opposition to Israel's existence have caused existential angst among Britain's Jews. Can you imagine? This is 2018, not 1938. 40% of Jews are seriously considering that their ability to live worthwhile, full lives in Britain will be compromised if one of two major parties comes into power. On one website, an anti-Semitic comment summed up the fears. You can't be Jewish and British at the same time. Choose one. In the United States, anti-Semitic incidents rose 57% in the United States in 2017, the largest single-year increase on record according to the Anti-Defamation League. And it is affecting our young people most of all. There was a 90% increase in incidents in college campuses, 94% increase in K-12 schools. Last year, there were 4.2 million anti-Semitic tweets by 3 million different people. These are facts about things that we cannot control, although we can influence them to a degree through our education. And thankfully, these statistics are not the full story. We still live in unprecedented times of acceptance, multi-faith dialogue, and collaboration, and influence of society. Yet we cannot pretend that we can be Jewish without addressing our relationship with Israel. With anti-Semitism on the left, as the situation in England illustrates, and on the right, as these statistics demonstrate, we need to figure out how to talk about Israel with friends and neighbors in a way that can dispel myths and broaden the conversation. There is yet another kind of fear, a fear not for Israel and its existence and not about how Israel impacts our life, but a fear for what Israel is becoming. When we see the current government continue settlements building in parts of the West Bank that erode possibilities for a two-state solution, there is cause to protest. When that same government allies with ultra-Orthodox partners to delegitimize liberal Judaism, we should not be silent. And this leads to the final reason we talk about Israel. Out of responsibility to the Jewish people and from our values. We are the people Yisrael, a minority in the world. We are smaller in number than the margin of error in a Chinese census. We are not even 15 million souls. The largest number of us lives in Israel, then in the United States. As a small family, we are interconnected whether our ideologies desire it or not. We are, in the words of Torah, Am Kadosh, a religious people, Yisrael, both a people and a religion. Our responsibility is to our people and to our values. As we talk about Israel, we will engage most of the diverse voices in our small Jewish family if we honor three values: justice, self-preservation, and compromise. From Abraham to Isaiah to Abraham Joshua Heschel to Anat Hoffman, our demand for justice through the millennia is as central to our understanding of Judaism as any value. As Isaiah says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. Yossi Klein Halevi applies this value when he says to his Palestinian neighbor, I could no longer ignore your counter-story of invasion, occupation, and expulsion. For many years, we in Israel have ignored you, treated you as invisible, transparent. Just as the Arab world denied the right of Jews to define themselves as a people deserving national sovereignty, so we denied the Palestinians the right to define themselves as a distinct people within the Arab nation, and likewise deserving of national sovereignty. History is the reservoir of resentment, writes scholar Robert Rotberg, in building legitimacy through narrative. There are so many narratives in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Honoring each person's story and then moving past our history will enable justice to roll down like waters. The value of self-preservation should be self-evident. It is rooted in the creation story we just heard. We are created in the image of God and thus made to protect ourselves. When Israelis speak of security and concerns about its enemies, they are speaking the language of self-preservation. Too often, justice is the Jewish value emphasized only by people on the left, and self-preservation by those on the right. This puts liberal Zionists in the peculiar position of holding both values, which leads to both supporting Israel and fighting Israel. We must defend and criticize Israel with the same emphasis, with the same breath. Defend Israel's need to defend itself, but criticize the building of settlements that divide the West Bank. I am reminded of the story of the married couple who came to the rabbi to resolve their differences. The rabbi listened to the husband and said, "My son, you are right." He then listened to the wife and said, "My daughter, you are right." Overhearing the conversation, the rabbi's wife questioned, "How can they both be right?" To which the rabbi replied, "My dear, you are also right." And that is the paradox of holding equally the value of justice forged in our history of powerlessness over 2 millennia and the value of self-preservation, which comes naturally in a time of power on the Israeli state. You're right, and you're right. That is the value of compromise. Halevi writes to his neighbor, "My people will fulfill its right of return to the state of Israel, not to the whole land of Israel. Your people will fulfill the right of return to Palestine, not to the whole land of Palestine." Justice and self-preservation require compromise. The answer is clear. Our narratives and history just get in the way. We do need to talk about Israel, and as we do so, we must first listen to many, many people with different views. Affirm what is right in what you are hearing, and then offer something that the other person might not have considered. They may just say, you may be right too. Sometimes we need to stop talking and just experience something powerful. On Israel's 70th anniversary this past year, President of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, assembled 12,000 singers from all streams of Israel's society to sing Naomi Shemer's Al Kol Eileh. It is the perfect song for Rosh Hashanah. For the honey we dip our apples into is not created without a bee that has a stinger. As Shemer writes, over all these things, please stand guard for me, my good God. al hadvash ve'al ha'oketz, over the honey and the stinger, over the bitter and the sweet. Don't uproot a sapling, don't forget the hope. May you return to me, and may I return to the good land. Let's sing together, the president declared. Religious, secular, Arabs, Jews, soldiers, women, men, children. Let's put aside everything that divides us and do together what connects us and brings us together. It'll be fun. Now that's an image of hope. I wonder what my fifth graders from Larchmont would think. Whether the love for a diverse and complex Israel and that sing-along would move them. Would it inspire them to talk more about their relationship with Israel? Would it help them embrace multiple truths and values? My heartfelt prayer is yes. Can you hear Ratzon? Be this our will and God's.